I24 News. It is week 4 of the U.S. government shutdown, and despite outcries from within his own Republican Party, President Trump is not budging on his demands that all members of Congress surrender the taxpayers' money for a border wall.
The Democrats are stopping us, and they're stopping a lot of great people from getting paid. All they have to do is say, we want border security. That automatically means a wall or a barrier.
The shutdown is causing TSA staffing shortages at airports around the country. Travelers in many major cities are facing long lines at security checkpoints.
Meanwhile, some furloughed U.S. government workers are reportedly lining up at local food banks and pantries. Without paychecks, these workers are struggling to make ends meet.
And the president is facing new questions about his administration's relationship with Russia after back-to-back reports he fell under the Kremlin's influence.
Plus, U.S. Secretary of State Mike Pompeo just met with the Saudi Crown Prince. They reportedly talked about war, human rights, and murder.
From the I24 News studios in Times Square in New York, this is Crossroads with David Schuster and Tal Heinrich.
This was day 24 in the U.S. government shutdown, the longest in American history.
And the consequences of the shutdown are starting to show their ugly side for both regular Americans and furloughed government workers. Serena Marshall has details.
The president departing the White House for New Orleans, but the shutdown following him.
I've been here all weekend. I don't know if we're closer to deal.
Congress back in D.C. from their home districts and not feeling the pressure yet. A new ABC News Washington Post poll finds 82% of Americans say they have not been inconvenienced. And the president still insists federal workers are with him.
Many of the people that aren't being paid right now are in total agreement with us.
But the same poll found most Americans blame Mr. Trump and Republicans for the shutdown. One of his biggest allies telling the president over the weekend,
I tried to see if we could open up the government for a limited period of time to negotiate a deal.
The impact felt most by federal workers and their families.
We're going to have to take loans. We're going to have to use credit cards. I mean, I really don't want to be in that situation.
In Maryland, hundreds of federal employees visiting a pop-up food bank. In Tampa, the New York Times reporting TSA officers showing up in their uniforms and collecting food from a makeshift food pantry. After their paychecks last week read $0. TSA callouts are now more than double compared to normal operations, with major airports, including Miami and Houston, closing terminals. The FAA has called more inspectors back to work, as did the FDA. The agency's commissioner called the funding lapse one of the most significant operational challenges in FDA's recent history.
Let's bring in senior Washington correspondent Dan Raviv. Dan, would you say that President Trump's focus now is on criticizing the Democrats and blaming them for the long government shutdown, or is he mostly trying to build a case to win public support for a wall on the Mexican border?
Tal, you can do both at the same time. Blast the Democrats and talk about the need for a wall or fence on the border. I'd say in the past week, Trump has really been trying to make a reasonable case that even if you don't accept the exact numbers of crimes he blames on people entering from the South or how much drug smuggling there is, clearly there's some crime and some drugs. He's no longer just leading his crowds in chanting "build the wall." He's building a case with claims that Democrats are not directly confronting as to how a barrier could save lives, could cut crime. Now, Democrats are just saying that his case is exaggerated and spending $5.7 billion on his dream would be wasteful. Tal and David?
And the president was in New Orleans on this day speaking to a farmers organization, the Farm Bureau. But aren't farmers also suffering from the fact that the Department of Agriculture has been shut down since, well, for the last 24 days?
Yeah, they found it difficult to apply for subsidies, other services they need from the Ag Department. And if you think about it, there are tens of thousands of Americans who every day normally want to ask various government agencies some questions, and there's nobody answering the phone at a lot of departments. But President Trump, who is believed to have won most farmers' votes in 2016, was assuring his audience that if they stick with him, it's going to be great. In effect, he was asking for patience. They'll see that the new trade agreement to replace NAFTA will make it much easier to export American farm products, especially to Canada. The president even said his administration will let Central American workers in to work on farms, but they're going to be carefully vetted. They'll have visas. And here's what he said about his trade and tariffs war against China.
I couldn't believe how complicated your business is with the seeds and the genetic farming. It's incredible. People don't know this. But your secrets were being stolen by China and, in all fairness, other countries. We want a fair deal for American farmers, removing China's arbitrary bans on agricultural imports, safeguarding our intellectual property, and providing fair market access to all American producers.
For this particular speech in New Orleans, the president mainly was reading from the teleprompter. He did make some significant points, and then he would ad-lib, typically with exaggerated or even some false claims. Either way, nothing that moved the country closer to a compromise on border security, and nothing that moves us closer to reopening the whole government. David and Tal?
Dan Raviv, our senior Washington correspondent. Dan, thank you. And for more, let's turn to our senior national correspondent, Michael Schur. And Schur, what do you make of that sort of impact in terms of how Donald Trump gets received these days, specifically in rural communities and by farmers, given that they're also suffering from the government shutdown?
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's not just the fact that the subsidies are at issue. The USDA, U.S. Department of Agriculture, is having trouble right now with their members and people that rely on them because of the favorable mortgages and loans that they give to farmers that they can't go and get. And those are important, as well as, you know, last week they extended the deadline for applying for those subsidies that were put in place by the White House because of the tariffs and the trade war going on with China. So applying for that becomes all the more difficult for these farmers. This, though, today was a campaign stop for the president. He's going to essentially his base. As Dan Raviv said, many farmers in America, most of them, voted for this president. They had a really hard time swallowing the trade and the tariffs. Soybean farmers in the Midwest had that really difficult time last summer. And now you hear this going on with the government shutdown. He wants to hang on to part of his base, David and Tal.
Michael, it seems that lawmakers are also losing patience in this standoff, and we start seeing some cracks on both sides of the aisle, with Senator Lindsey Graham, Republican senator, calling on the president to end this shutdown. What is Senator Graham suggesting?
Well, here's the thing, Tal. One thing, when you see poll numbers, then you start seeing members of Congress reacting. And the poll numbers today showed that they blame the president by 56%, and Democrats saying getting 36%, a 20-point disparity in that. And that's a huge problem for the president. It's a huge problem for Republicans, and Graham and some of the other senators want to see Mitch McConnell step in. They want to see the Senate come to the rescue in this case. Take this, bifurcate this, take the wall out of the funding for the government, and find another way to do border security, Tom.
And, Michael, what's been the impact as these stories get more dire for government workers, whether they're lining up at food pantries or needing food stamps, which, by the way, another program that could end in another month or so. How does that impact the overall political equation?
Well, as soon as it starts affecting the people, then it starts impacting the political equation. Right now, it's from afar. There are 800,000 people who are immediately impacted, people who couldn't get paychecks last Friday. But as soon as it starts affecting the public, then you start seeing the political impact, and it's doing that in a big way at airports, especially with the weather that the East Coast is having. You're seeing the impact at airports, and now the FAA is starting to say, listen, if TSA can't get this together, we're going to have to re-examine how we're going to manage these airports right now, because they're talking about dangers that were unforeseen by having a slowdown at TSA. Miami closing a terminal, huge backlogs in Atlanta. So these are big problems for the government. And as soon as Washington sees that, then it's politics.
Michael Schur, senior national correspondent. Schur, thank you.
Yeah.
David, what I think is really interesting and happened over the last few days is that up until now, we heard a president speaking a lot about illegal immigration and the need to stop it on the border. But now recently he started talking about legal immigration as well. Like today when he addressed the Farmers Bureau. He said that he's going to make it easier for immigrants to come and work for farms. He tweeted about H-1B visas on Friday. So what do you think of?
Well, he's trying to make it a larger issue, right? Make it more about comprehensive immigration, not just the wall, because maybe it polls better. But again, he's being hurt so badly by the fact the government's closed. I don't think any of this is breaking through. Still ahead on Crossroads, President Trump is ramping up his rhetoric against Turkey, a NATO ally. Mr. Trump is threatening severe economic sanctions if Turkey attacks U.S.-backed kurds in Syria.
And British Prime Minister Theresa May making an 11th hour pitch for her